Well, thank you very much for the invitation. So my talk today will be about a generalization of the Sacks and Uhlenbeck theorem of existence of minimal two spheres into a metric space setting. So we've seen the theorem before, and here we just extend it to the metric space world. Before going to the metric space setting, I want to talk a little bit about the problem, just so everyone is up to date. So we have given a closed surface equipped with a Riemannian metric, that's M, and N a compact Riemannian manifold. And we can pose the question whether every continuous map is homotopic to a harmonic map. And just for the purpose of this talk, by harmonic, I just mean it's a critical point of the Dirichlet energy. Okay. So it was shown in the around 1980, independently by Lemaire, Yao, and Sacks and Uhlenbeck, that if the second homotopy group is trivial, then the answer to the question is yes. And just to recall, the second homotopy group is trivial in case we can contract every continuous sphere exactly. And it turns out that the theorem is wrong, or the answer to the question is no, in case of pi2 being non-trivial. So what is a sort of a classical approach to such a problem? It's, so we have given a set lambda phi of sort of admissible mappings. So these are all Sobolev maps that are continuous and homotopic to the given map phi, and little e of phi is the infemal energy. And we can rephrase the question as, well, can we always find a U in this class of admissible mappings whose energy realizes this infemal energy? And, well, a natural approach is to perform a direct variational method. So we first show that this set lambda phi is non-empty. And then we take an energy minimizing sequence and use compactness results to show that the subsequence converges to a map U from M to N. And then we have to show that this map U is again in this class lambda phi. So this is non-trivial. And also, after that, we can use the lower semi-continuity of energy to derive that this is indeed an energy minimizer. And because of the energy minimizing property, one can use that to show that it satisfies further regularity properties. So that's sort of the natural approach, and it's also the approach that we want to follow today in this talk. So a little example, very simple example. Namely, we have the scaling map. So the scaling map is a map from S2 to S2, and it's just the composition of the stereographic projection, and then we scale it by a factor of lambda, and we map it back by the inverse of the stereographic projection. So it sends a ball of a certain radius around the south pole to a smaller ball if lambda is less than 1. And this, of course, is a conformal map, because it's a composition of conformal mappings, and it's homotopic to the identity. So it's in the class lambda of the identity map. And the energy, because it's conformal, it's the same as the energy of the identity mapping, which is just 4 pi, and which is, of course, the infemal energy in this homotopy class. So now we take a sequence of lambda n going to 0, and then this sequence of scaling maps, psi lambda n, that's an energy minimizing sequence, okay? Because all of these mappings have infemal energy. But it converges in L2 to a constant map, because like a very big ball gets mapped to a very, very small ball. So in particular, the L2 limit here is not in the same homotopy class. So this might happen, and somehow one wants to prevent that, okay? Or exactly. So Sacks and Uhlenbeck, so this is the result that we want to generalize. They show the following. They show that, well, if pi2 of our target n is non-trivial, then we find a non-contractible map that minimizes the energy within its homotopy class. And then this map has further regularity properties. It's a conformal branched immersion. So how they go about proving that is, well, instead of only considering the Dirichlet energy, they consider a perturbed energy functional, E alpha, so which converges for alpha going to 1, it converges to the Dirichlet energy plus some constant. Okay. And I'm mentioning that, so their proof heavily relies on a priori estimates from the Euler-Lagrange equation of this perturbed energy. And so this is important to note because we want to generalize to a metric space setting where we don't have PDEs and things like that. So it's, we sort of have to think of other ways to prove that. So what they then do is they show that if one takes the E alpha minimizer, V alpha in this homotopy class, and they study the convergence of these mappings when alpha goes to 1. And what I find is also something that Melanie Rupflin, I think, explained very well, is that they find a finite set S inside M, such that outside of that set, the map converges smoothly, and the limit extends to a smooth harmonic map from M into N. And then around these points, you can sort of rescale and blow it up such that you find these minimal harmonic mappings, non-trivial, from the sphere to N. So that's a finite number of mappings. So I tried to draw a picture of like what happening, that should sort of show the rescaling. Okay, and that is called bubbling. Now, one thing they prove in their result, in their article, is that all these harmonic, non-trivial harmonic mappings, they sort of have a lower energy bound. So that's another thing that we're going to see later on, and that's why I'm mentioning it here. But one can, of course, ask throughout that process, somehow, does one have to add energy to create these bubbles, or is energy lost? And it was later shown by Joost that actually no, for these mappings constructed in this way, you have something that's called energy identity. So the sum of the infemal energies of all of these pieces is the same as the infemal energy of the original map. Okay, so this is all I want to say about the classical result. Of course, like we all know that there has been a lot going on ever since, but I'm just going to focus on what our goal and our sort of idea were. Good. So the questions we want to answer today is, do these results generalize to a metric space targets, to non-smooth targets? And also we want to find out what are sort of the essential assumptions that guarantee the existence of non-trivial harmonic spheres. And this is something I very much like when working in metric spaces, is because we sort of only want to talk about the essential parts, often what we get along the way is we get somehow conceptually simpler proofs because we only have what is really needed. And that's also our hope, is to find sort of also conceptually simpler proof of the results of Sacks and Uhlenbeck, in particular not using PDE methods. Okay. So far, so good. So to work in this metric space setting, we need, of course, a notion of Sobolev map into metric spaces. So here, again, we have X is just a compact metric space, M is a closed surface equipped with a Riemannian metric, and omega is an open subset of M. And we call a measurable map being L2 integrable if we find a point in our space such that the post-composition with the distance map to that point is in L2. So that's the map UX. And such a map, such an L2 integrable map is in the Sobolev space W12 of omega x if this post-composition is in the classical Sobolev space, okay, for every point x in our space. And we sort of find an L2 function which dominates the norm of the weak derivative for all points x of this post-composition. Okay, so these are the mappings that we work with. Just by taking the infimum of the L2 norm squared over all such dominating functions h, we get a notion of energy. Now, our results that I'm going to show in the next few minutes they're also true for other notions of energy. In fact, very general notions of energy, all we really need is lower semi-continuity of energy. And in particular, they also hold for the Corey-Varchet energy, which is a generalization of the Dirichlet energy in this metric space setting. But I chose this definition of energy because it's very simple to define, and also it carries the best regularity properties. So that's why we stick with Reshetnik energy just for the purpose of this talk. Good. So far, so good. We can now talk about the assumptions on our spaces. And the first assumption is that X admits a local quadratic isoperimetric inequality. What does this mean? This means that every short enough Lipschitz curve can somehow be filled with a Sobolev map whose area is bounded from above by a constant times the length of the curve squared. Now, I did not define area, and well, how it works is you can somehow differentiate Sobolev mappings and then define a Jacobian and integrate, and this gives you a notion of area. If U is injective and maps sets of measure 0 to sets of measure 0, this is just the Hausdorff 2 measure of the image of U. Okay. And also, I said that this map sort of fills the curve. So what I mean is that the trace of the map, of the Sobolev map, is the curve gamma. And by trace, you can just think, well, if U would be defined on the whole unit disk and continuous, then it would just be the restriction to the boundary. So it's like a boundary map. Okay. So why do we assume that? There has been sort of a series of articles surrounding solving Plateau's problem in proper metric spaces, admitting a local quadratic isoperimetric inequality by Lichak and Wenger and co-authors. And this sort of theory is very powerful. And one of the theorems that we'll use in the following is that, well, if we've given a Sobolev map, then we find a Sobolev map B with the same trace that minimizes the energy among all maps with this trace. Okay? And any such V has a locally Hölder continuous representative, V bar, which extends continuously to the boundary in case of the trace being continuous itself. So this we'll call a Dirichlet solution, since we somehow prescribe boundary values in some sense. And this will appear a lot throughout our work. Exactly. So that's the first assumption. The next assumption is that we want our space to be quasi-convex. And that's not really a convexity property. It's rather a generalization of being geodesic. So a geodesic metric space is one quasi-convex. And the condition is that every pair of points can be joined by a curve whose length is bounded from above by a fixed multiple times the distance. So the slit disk inherited with the metric from R2 is not quasi-convex because you can move the points x and y arbitrarily close to the slit from different sides, but the curve, you can't really get an arbitrarily small curve in that sense. Whereas as soon as you have some angle in there, this is quasi-convex. And the last condition that we want is that every continuous map from the sphere into our space of a sufficiently small diameter is null homotopic. And you might wonder now, well, these are very abstract conditions, but in fact, there's a huge class of spaces satisfying all of these conditions. So closed Riemannian manifolds, compact Lipschitz manifolds, compact locally kept kappa spaces for all kappas, and some compact sub-Riemannian manifolds, and so on. So these are very light conditions in some sense. Okay, so before talking about the existence, I want to spend a few minutes to talk about the regularity properties of homotopic energy minimizers. So we now assume that we've given always assume that we've given a closed surface equipped with a Riemannian metric G and X satisfying the properties that I just introduced. So from now on, these are our standing assumptions. And the proposition I'm talking about here is that in case U minimizes the energy in its homotopy class, then this map is harmonic. So it's locally energy minimizing. That's what I mean by harmonic here. And one can apply results from Litvak and Wenger again to show that thus it's Hölder continuous. And moreover, if M is diffeomorphic to the sphere, then it is infinitesimally quasi-conformal. So I'm going to define that in a second. First, I'm just saying that Hölder continuity is really the best we can hope for. And the example is the map that I draw here. So you can take a double cone of small cone angle, and U is in some sense behaves like a radial stretch function, which is alpha Hölder for some alpha between 0 and 1. And you can show that that's indeed an energy minimizer in the respective homotopy class. And so you can't get better than Hölder continuity. So infinitesimal quasi-conformality can be very vaguely defined as follows, that we just divide the maximal stretch at the point by the minimal stretch at the point, and this is bounded from above. So we, for almost every point in the sphere. And so I mentioned before that the Reshetnik energy somehow has the best regularity properties. There we even get that the map is infinitesimally isotropic. And this is sort of the strongest or very strong version of weak conformality in metric spaces. So in particular, it implies weak conformality in case X is Riemannian or locally cut1 or yes. So these are regularity properties. Now, for the existence, the first theorem that we have is in analogy to the first theorem that I've shown today. So if pi2 is trivial, then for every continuous map, we find an energy minimizer in its homotopy class. But the theorem fails for pi2 being non-trivial, and that's, for example, this example here that I want to show to you. So what you take is you take two copies of S2 and you connect them by an interval. So you glue that together, and well, this has non-trivial second homotopy group, and it satisfies all standing assumptions. Even more, I mean, it's a very close to being smooth in some sense, right? It's a nice metric space. And the map phi is just a map that sort of wraps around both spheres and sort of sends this, for example, it might send this region around the equator to this interval. So if we assume that we find an energy minimizer in the homotopy class of phi, then we know by our regularity results that this is infinitesimally quasi-conformal. And in particular, we get this, we get a lower bound on the maximal stretch in terms of some constant times the minimal stretch. But now we map something to the interval, which is only one-dimensional, so the minimal stretch should be 0, and the maximal stretch therefore also. So the energy of U sort of on the preimage of the interval is 0. and therefore it's a constant, it's locally constant on this preimage, which of course cannot happen because then we would not map to both spheres. Okay, so this is sort of an example where it fails, but of course, I mean, if you sort of decompose the map, then you have, like, for both of these spheres, you get minimal harmonic mappings, of course. So our goal was to then, like, find a metric way of describing these bubbles in order to get our main theorem. And that goes as follows. So we say that a map phi, continuous map, is decomposed by two mappings, phi 0 and phi 1, where phi 0 is just a map phi except on a ball in our domain, M. And phi 1 agrees with a phi on this ball, or it's obtained by gluing phi restricted to the ball and phi 0 restricted to the ball along the boundary and sort of reparameterized to get a sphere. So phi 0 is always defined on M, and phi 1 is defined on S2. So you can sort of imagine of just gluing something inside and like adding it to both parts and then sort of making two maps out of it. But of course, we want that the sphere is essential, so it's not null homotopic. So phi 1 is essential, and if in case of M being equal to S2, also phi 0 should be not null homotopic. So that's a way to decompose sort of the initial map into two mappings, and yes. But we also need to further decompose, right? That's just one decomposition, and we have this term of iterated decomposition where we just start with a 0-step iterated decomposition, which is just the initial map. And then we say a k-step iterated decomposition, it just comes from a k-1 step by decomposing one of the maps and keeping all others. And phi 0 is always defined on M, and all others are somehow these bubbles, so these spheres. Exactly. So these are decompositions. Now we finally get to our main theorem, and the main theorem tells us, well, we get the same as in the case of Sacks Uhlenbeck, the proof that I explained, namely that we get these iterated decomposition, such that when we add the infemal energies, it's the infemal energy of phi, and every such phi I contains an energy minimizer in its homotopy class. So this is the existence of non-trivial harmonic spheres in case of pi 2 being non-trivial, because then we always get a decomposition from a sphere. Yes?
The statement on the previous slide made it look like you only found like one energy concentration point at every step. Are you just simplifying it for the purposes? I mean, like there could be multiple.
Yes, exactly. You can also
multiple bubbles on a bubble.
Yeah. You can further decompose the bubbles. You don't only decompose the first map, you also decompose all other, you can also decompose all other mappings. Yes. Yes, any other questions? So just to mention, because this is also hold for the Corovan chain energy, we generalize the theorems of Lemaire, Shannon, Yao, and Sacks Uhlenbeck in case of X being Riemannian. And we also generalize a result of these list of authors, and I'm very happy that half of them are here. So that's really nice. They proved that theorem for locally cat1 spaces. Yes.
Sorry.
Yes.
When you look at the different energies, Riemannian versus the Corovan, for example, the maps you obtain are a priori different, or can you say something about whether you actually get the same maps?
I did not.
The energies are comparable, but
Yeah, the energies are comparable. That's exactly. I guess the maps might be different, but I haven't thought about that. Yeah.
is the class? So
class of phi be the sum of the classes of phi 0 plus phi 1 plus phi k? So it's,
what is the question? If M is the sphere?
so if you look at the homotopy class of phi,
Yes.
is it the sum of the classes of phi 0 plus phi 1 plus phi k? So are you generating the word phi 2?
Yes, 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 yes. We also get that as a corollary. Yes, you can do that. Yeah. Okay. Good. So we now are gonna spend some time on the proof of this main theorem. So of course, at first, we want to establish that actually the set of like homotopic Sobolev mappings is non-empty. And this is not the hardest part of our work at all, but I thought I would still show you how we do that because I think it illustrates very nicely how these assumptions that we put on our space X are used all throughout the work. So what we do is we choose a fine triangulation of M, and obviously by triangulation I do not mean triangles, it could be some polygons in some sense. And what we do is we map all vertices, or we define our map U, so that's the Sobolev map that we want in the end, that's homotopic to phi, and we just define it on the set of vertices as phi restricted to the set of vertices. And then we use quasiconvexity. So quasiconvexity tells us that between any neighboring 2 points, we can find a curve whose length is sort of bounded by fixed multiple times the distance of the points. So we can reparameterize that by arc length, and we get a Lipschitz map from the one skeleton into X. Okay. Now that we have a Lipschitz map, we can, of course, use the quadratic isoperimetric inequality to sort of extend that Lipschitz map. And the work of Litvak and Wenger tells us that we can do that even in a way that we find a P which is strictly bigger than 2, such that the map, the extension, is in W1P. So it's held continuous, and we can sort of bound the diameter of any image of a 2-cell. And by doing that, what we've shown is that we can approximate our original map phi with a Sobolev map whose distance is arbitrarily close or to the map phi. So we choose a map that is very, very close, and then we can construct a homotopy by, again, sort of using these tools or the same sort of strategy. So we first take the one skeleton and we connect points that are close, epsilon close to each other by curves of bounded length, or Lipschitz curves, and then we use the quadratic isoperimetric inequality to fill these, and then we glue that together. So we will get this annulus, and then we glue it together with sort of phi restricted to a 2-cell and U restricted to a 2-cell, and we get a Sobolev sphere of small diameter, indeed. And once we have this Sobolev sphere of small diameter, we can use the contractibility of spheres, and that's the last condition, to then construct a homotopy. So that's sort of, you can, I think, very good see these conditions. Now, a second fact that we're going to use in the following is that spheres of small area are null homotopic. And this looks very similar to the condition that I put on the space that spheres of small diameter are null homotopic. But just to be careful, you can sort of have a Sobolev sphere in a metric space of arbitrarily small area, but the diameter is huge. So this is easy to construct. So there is some work involved in proving that we actually find a sort of a threshold, epsilon 0, such that every Sobolev map with area less than epsilon 0 is null homotopic. And what we get as directly from that is that if we have a sphere that is not null homotopic, then the energy which always dominates the area is strictly, or is bounded from below by this epsilon 0. So that's somehow in the spirit of this theorem of Sacks and Uhlenbeck, but they only prove that for harmonic spheres. And here we have it for all Sobolev spheres, in some sense. Okay, so just to recall, we want to follow a direct variational method. And so in some sense, we want to get convergence of energy minimizing sequences. So in the following, we call a sequence of continuous Sobolev maps minimizing if sort of the energy of the map minus the energy of the respective homotopic class, the infemal energy, goes to 0. So these maps, a priori, they might not lie in the same homotopy class, a priori. What Rehlich-Kondratyev tells us is that such a sequence, or any sequence of uniformly bounded energy, has a subsequence which converges in L2 to a Sobolev map. So we need that, but that is very nice, so we have a limit. But of course, a priori, there's no reason why this limit has a continuous representative, okay? So we need some condition to ensure that this happens. And also, even if it does have a continuous representative and the whole sequence lies in the same homotopy class, it is very unclear why the limit should be homotopic to these mappings, right? Because that's the example I showed in the beginning of descaling maps, where the limit, it's a constant map, but it's of course not in the same homotopy class. So we have to be very careful here, and our first goal was sort of to find a condition that guarantees these nice convergence properties. And the condition we found is sort of that we find a radius, or if there exists a radius such that the energy restricted to a ball of that radius is small, uniformly small everywhere, that then the limit map actually has a continuous representative, which is an energy minimizer in its homotopy class. And moreover, for sufficiently large n, the elements of the sequence will be homotopic to that map. So even if we don't a priori know the homotopy class of the elements, we know that after a certain n, they are all homotopic. So that's a really, really important part of our proof. And so what's the idea behind proving that? So the idea is to build a homotopy between un and this limit map u, or as in A, so the construction of homotopic Sobolev mappings, while using this part B of the contractibility of spheres of small area. But somehow, what are our main issues? Of course, I mean, to build a homotopy, we first have to know that U has a continuous representative, because otherwise, what is a homotopy? And then the second problem is sort of we only have L2 convergence. So before we could take them to be uniformly close, these two maps, and then build a homotopy. But here, we only have L2 convergence. So how we sort of make our way around that is, first, we have to get good control along a one skeleton. And the point here is that Sobolev maps, they behave very nicely on almost every curve. So they're absolutely continuous on almost every curve. And what we can show is that if we take a fine triangulation and we sort of wiggle that around, at some point we find a triangulation such that up to taking a subsequence, when we restrict the sequence un to that one skeleton, this has uniformly bounded length. And it converges uniformly to the continuous representative of u restricted to the one skeleton of this sort of perturbed triangulation. And of course, this statement here contains the fact that this continuous representative of U restricted to the one skeleton exists also. So we have somehow good regularity on the one skeleton, and this sort of uses methods that were introduced in work of Sultanis and Wenger. So we have this control along the one skeleton, and what we want to do next is we want to compare our limit map U to the map V that we define as follows. So we define V to agree with the continuous representative of U restricted to the one skeleton. And on every 2 cell, it's just the Dirichlet solution with that trace. So we fill sort of this continuous representative with the Dirichlet solutions, and that's our map V. Now, this map is continuous by, I guess, work of Litvak and Wenger. We can assume that this is continuous, and we can now define a homotopy from UN to V for large N, because we have that on the one skeletons, they're uniformly close. And then we can build a Sobolev annulus. For every 2 cell, we build a Sobolev annulus of small area between sort of these boundaries. And so that works as before, same or very similar arguments as before. We then glue in V restricted to the 2 cell and UN restricted to this 2 cell, and this gives us a Sobolev sphere of small area, which we know is contractible, so this induces a homotopy. So what we've established is that UN is homotopic to V, and we sort of get a sequence of inequalities that I'm going to describe right now. So the first one is just, well, the infemal energy of V is less than or equal to the energy of V. Now, by construction, because we chose V to somehow agree with U on the one skeleton and taking energy minimizers on 2 cells, the energy of V is less than the energy of U. And then by lower semi-continuity of energy, the energy of U is less than the energy of the limb end. And this condition of being minimizing and the fact that every UN for large enough N, or at least a subsequence, is homotopic to V, gives the last equality. So in particular, we have equality everywhere, which induces that, in fact, our limit map U minimizes energy on every 2 cell of the triangulation. And then we can again apply the theorem of Litvak and Wenger to show that U actually has a continuous representative U bar.
So you are not claiming that V equals U?
No. No. It suffices, like this is enough. They're both energy minimizing on. Yes. And once we have the continuous representative, of course, we can just proceed as sort of in this upper part of the slide to create a homotopy between U bar and UN. And this for all large enough N. And this gives us this statement. Okay, so far so good. So that's the first very important ingredient. Now, of course, we want to know, well, what kind of condition would guarantee a minimizing sequence to have uniformly distributed energy? And we found a condition that we're calling epsilon indecomposability. And it's described as follows. So whenever a continuous map has a decomposition, then the infemal sum of the energies of the decomposition is bigger than the infemal energy of the original map plus some epsilon. So I drew 2 examples here. The upper example there, if you take the map to be sort of the blue and the red part, then it only decomposes into 2 maps whenever we add this orange part in some sense. Okay, so we have to add some energy to create a decomposition. So this is epsilon indecomposable for some epsilon. Whereas the other example, when the map is sort of wraps around both spheres and the spheres only touch in one point, we can always decompose that without adding energy. So it's not epsilon indecomposable. So far, so good. What we showed is the following proposition. So in case we have a map that is epsilon indecomposable for some epsilon below our threshold, epsilon 0, then we find a radius such that in case we take a map U in the homotopy class that is almost energy minimizing, then we find a conformal diffeomorphism such that when precomposing with this conformal diffeomorphism, the energy is as small as we want, like epsilon 0 divided by 5, what we need in the last theorem. And just to mention, this diffeomorphism is only needed in the case of M being diffeomorphic to the sphere. Otherwise, we don't need it. So, but for simplicity, I wanted to just write one statement. So we can choose this diffeomorphism just to be the identity in all other cases. Okay, so far so good. Do I have questions? Good. So how can we prove this theorem? So we have to choose R0 very well, and in particular it decreases as epsilon, the infemal energy increases. And we assume that we find a point such that when we're, the energy to the ball of U restricted to the ball around that point of radius R0 is bigger than what we want. So we go by contradiction and assume that this is sort of on this ball, we have a lot of energy. We can still find a Jordan curve sort of surrounding this ball with very small energy, as small as we want, plus the noted delta. And well, R0 depends on that delta, but whatever. It's small and small length. Okay, so the image has small energy and small length. Now, if we choose V to be the Dirichlet solution with that trace, then we can apply another result of Litvak and Wenger, which is known as the energy filling inequality, and it tells us that, well, since U composed with gamma is the trace of V, we can bound the energy of V by a constant, which only depends on the isoperimetric inequality constant, times the energy of U composed with gamma. So times sort of the energy of the boundary. And this we chose to be strictly less than delta, so we can get that map V to have very small energy. And what we do is, so we had that ball with a lot of energy, and we sort of replace it on that ball with V to get one map, and the other map we just take sort of, well, V on, like, U on the ball and V on the ball. Okay, so first we observe that in case, so we have these two mappings, one defined in the sphere and the other one defined on M, by using this map V and gluing it in there. And we first observed that, well, in case phi 1 would be null homotopic, then we would have that phi 0 is homotopic to phi. But since we can choose our energies in a good way, so we had that U is almost energy minimizing, so it's very close to the infemal energy of phi. And, well, the energy on the ball is big, but the energy that we added is small, so this is not possible. So in fact, what we have is we have a decomposition. So phi 0 and phi 1 form a decomposition of phi. And, well, we can perform exactly the same argument to just get that, in fact, the sum of their energies is strictly smaller than the infemal energy of phi plus epsilon, which of course contradicts the epsilon indecomposability. So somehow the map that we glued in, the energy of that map is too small to be like for the epsilon indecomposability. So why do we need this additional diffeomorphism for the sphere? And that's just, well, in order to arrive at a contradiction to the epsilon indecomposability, this only happens in case both phi1 and phi0 are essential, okay? So we had that extra condition in case the domain is a sphere. And, well, we need to somehow precompose with this diffeomorphism, because otherwise what happens is what I've shown in the example of the stretch map in the beginning. There you also get concentrated energy around the point, right? So you have to rescale at every step to always get the identity map, and then the convergence is fine. And somehow this is very much in the same spirit. So when our domain is the sphere, we sort of need to reparameterize or precompose with a diffeomorphism, and then we can use a similar construction as before and derive at a contradiction. Okay, so we're now able to finish our proof. So we have these two main ingredients, the convergence of energy distributed minimizing sequences, and that epsilon indecomposability implies uniformly distributed energy. And of course, we somehow want to decompose our initial map in a way that we can apply two and then apply 1, and then get what we want. How we do that is we make the following observation. In case we have an iterated decomposition of phi, then it's a lemma, but one can show that the infemal energy of phi is always smaller than the sum, or equal to the sum of the infemal energies of the pieces of a decomposition. So this is one thing one can show. And the other thing one can show is that, well, each of these phi 1 to phi k is essential. So by our theorem B, this is bigger than epsilon 0. So in particular, if we define Ek as the infemal of the sum of the energies over all infemal energies over all k-step iterated decompositions of phi, then, well, E0 is just the infemal energy of phi, because that's how we defined the 0-step iterated decomposition. And then by this observation above, Ek plus 1 is always bigger than Ek for all k. And because we have that every sort of sphere that we add has at least energy epsilon 0, we know that at some point we have to have a strict inequality. So what we define is we take m to be the largest integer, such that this number em is still equal to the infemal energy of phi. So that's, and then what we can do is we take a sequence of m-step iterated decomposition of phi, that sort of the sum of their energies converge to the infemal energy of phi. And for large enough n, every such phi I n will be epsilon indecomposable for the right choice of epsilon. So, okay, that's how we decompose it, and that's what we've established. Now we can, for each I and every n, we can choose a map in the homotopy class that is almost energy minimizing. Okay, and then, so since these maps, the maps phi I n are all epsilon indecomposable, we know by the statement 2 that we find these radii and conformal diffeomorphisms such that the precomposition with the conformal diffeomorphisms on our eyeballs have small energy. In particular, we can apply statement 1. So UIN composed with the conformal diffeomorphism convergence in L2 to a continuous map, Sobolev map, who's an energy minimizer, and UI is homotopic to this composition for sufficiently large n, and thus also to phi in. So this finishes our proof. before I'm ending, I just want to mention 2 open questions. So the first one comes from the fact, is the question whether, well, when we have X, a compact vector space with non-trivial higher homotopy groups, can we, or under what additional assumptions, can we find a minimal and non-trivial harmonic two-sphere? So this comes from the fact because in Sacks and Uhlenbeck, their methods allow them to somehow say or prove that well, even if the second homotopy group is trivial, as soon as you have a higher non-trivial homotopy group, you find a minimal two-sphere that is harmonic. So that's one question, but with our methods, of course, this is, I don't know, or I don't know a strategy on how to approach that. And the second question is just to recall, we had that energy minimizing spheres in homotopy classes, they're harmonic, so locally energy minimizing, and they are also infinitesimally quasi-conformal, but these are sort of separate results. And the question is here, is it true that every harmonic map is infinitesimally quasi-conformal? Yes. So this is all I wanted to say.